We have talked off mic before as to why you needed to get the goods from China.
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful because you could, just based on the way I'm dressed, I'm an economic nationalist. I think we should make more shit in the United States.
Yeah.
I think we should buy more stuff from the United States.
The problem is that we give that industry away.
We do. And so I think it would be very helpful if Pedro enlightens the audience as to why that is the case.
I'm happy to do so. As you guys know, and as I've mentioned on the podcast, I travel around to a lot of dive bars and chat with people routinely who bring up that question with me, where it's like, before all this happened and everybody got pissed off, people would routinely kind of tout that line of like, bring the jobs back, bring the manufacturing back. The reality of it is that I started to shift things over for my business from American suppliers to suppliers overseas, not just because it was cheaper, though it is. And I can explain to a degree why it is cheaper. And I can mostly speak about like China. Obviously, it varies. Some places it's cheaper because the labor's cheaper. There's a million reasons, right? For myself, it was kind of the whole thing. It's that the American suppliers, they're still getting their stuff from China. So it's not like they're really making it here, you know? They're still getting it from China. They're reselling it to me. So there's a big part of the markup. The service, and I hate to say it as an American, but it's like the service that I get from like foreign factories is often so much better than it is from an American factory. And that's not a universal, obviously. It depends on the business. The same way as like you could deal with a plumber that you absolutely love and then hire a different plumber and he fucks you over and doesn't answer his phone, you know, when your pipes are leaking, that sort of thing. So I think that part of it is that. My experience though with service is that it's been excellent working overseas. I chalk that up to just that they're really desperate to keep your business. You know, they don't want to fuck it up even once because you'll turn around and leave, you know? So that's part of it.
Also, they're a dime a dozen over there, too.
There's a lot more factories doing the same thing.
Small fish, big pond kind of situation over there.
The quality that they're able to produce, and I can only speak about basic consumer goods, because usually when I talk to people at like, you know, all of the podunk bars that I love chilling at, they'll talk about like, oh yeah, well things are cheaper because they're using slave labor over there or something like that. And I don't know enough about it to say that that sort of thing is not happening at any given place in the world, or here or wherever. But what I will tell you is that when I do like, it's like a virtual tour basically. So it's like a tour of the factory type of thing. What I will say is that American factories where you're doing something like making beer koozies or something like that, something that I deal in, and like I've produced these things before, you know, I've screen printed T-shirts, I've made a lot of the things that I sell myself, and the scale that we can do here doesn't compare to what you can do in a country like China or India, where they've got 1 billion plus people. And it's not that the people are doing the work in the way that we might imagine, where it's people getting paid, you know, a nickel a day. There are countries like that. But instead, when I do these virtual tours, it's incredibly automated factories that take up, like we would call them cities, you know, and it's machines that are doing the work. And it's like one person in like, you know, in basically like the clean gear, like a lab coat, walking around making sure the machines are doing it. The scale is just absolutely insane.
Let me jump in real quick. That will add to the point. It's not so much with China, but it's the same thing because China, United States, it's, you know, the battle of the two superpowers, so to speak. Yeah. And you can argue that this is all happening because I've heard some arguments that they want, Trump and the United States government wants to deplete the economy of China to prevent a potential attack on Taiwan.
Decoupling, they call it.
Yes, exactly. Yes. What I was likening to your point is that we have tried to bring, because Taiwan has a monopoly on chips.
Yes.
For the computers, phones,
TCMC,
everything.
it's called.
Exactly. They have tried to move those businesses here, and we've discussed this off mic, and the Taiwanese have said, we can't, you suck at this, essentially.
Yeah. I think that's a big aspect of it. It's that, I mean, and that goes into like types of things that, you know, we don't have time to get into, and maybe even shouldn't. Yeah. But it's like the way in which people work, like the value that we put to that.
McDonald's fingers that we have over here.
It changes with time, though. Yeah. And I mean, like the way that I usually pitch it to people, as to whether that's true or not, and I do think there's a lot of truth in that, it's that what we have in this country today is service jobs. 70% of the economy is service jobs, right? So my job is a service job. I design shit, I market it, we store it in a warehouse and we ship it out. basically all of that is service, I'm not like, working the machine itself that does it. Service jobs pay better than the actual manufacturing jobs. When you try and bring back jobs like that, you're not going to pay the people as much to do it. It's a lower income job is what it is. And for Americans to work, they want compensation that's going to be in tune with what it costs to live here. And this is an expensive country. That's really what it comes down to. We live in New Jersey, which is even more expensive. Yep. So yeah, I think that when they talk about, and be it when I mean they, it's like whoever, because Democrats and Republicans both talk about we're going to bring jobs back because they're buying votes.
Because that's how you get votes.
But that's not like what I dislike about that is that they're clearly pandering to people who, and I have nothing against them, but like people who work in the Rust Belt and what have you, where they had like legitimate jobs building cars and things like that. Like that's a job that can pay very well. Like I get that. But if you want to talk about making beer koozies in this country, what's that going to pay you? And what are you going? How are you going to motivate somebody to do that job seriously? And when you're talking about something like chips, and I'm much more limited in my knowledge with that, but you're still talking about like it's like a rubber stamp, work day. You're punching a clock, you're doing one thing, hitting a button. Not to say that the job doesn't, deserve compensation, what have you, but it's not
rewarding.
It's not rewarding by American standards, and it's a big. When you look at like economic evolution, then its countries go from extraction, we mine and things like that, and you get agriculture and textiles. And eventually you're manufacturing more complex products. And then eventually you're in the service industry. So the U.S. is where we wanted to be, Not to say that we shouldn't have manufacturing or anything like that, but we don't need to make beer koozies. We don't need to be knitting T-shirts.
I agree with you on that. However, we did run into something, and I'm sorry to bring up COVID. We did run into the issue because you can make the case that we were going to run into this regardless at some point, because if China did act on Taiwan and we were like, no, we'll defend Taiwan. Well, China would just be like, all right, there goes all your shit.
Right. So I'll chime in on that and say, because I do agree, right? With that gets back to, and maybe this is what the government's talking about right now, where they're basically, what it really comes down to is the choice that you want to make. We have a globalized world right now, to whatever degree you want to, acknowledge that exists. If you want that, then it results in you as the consumer here in the U.S. getting cheap goods, cheap consumer goods. The bottom line is that if you want a beer koozie, something that people didn't have in the 1920s, let's say, I'm speculating, but that's probably true, right? If you want that and you want it for a couple of bucks, well, then you can't make it here. We don't have the resources to do it at that price. So you could definitely have everything be here in the U.S., but you won't have a lot of the things that you want, at least for the price.
Well, it's also not going to be for the price. I've run into that. Yeah. Being an economic nationalist, I have tried to buy things that are cheap, but they are 5 times the price.
Exactly.
Like I'll use, for example, socks. Socks are cheap.
Yeah.
I've gotten like a pair that were made in America for $15.
And the cotton still came from somewhere else. The bottom line that I would say is that it's not that one way is right and the other one is wrong. I think this is a classic political mistake that people make. It's that there's some sort of a right way to do it. If there was a right way to do everything, then people would be doing it that way. That's not the case. It's that there's a trade-off between these things. So if you want that world where we make everything here, then get ready to pay a whole hell of a lot, which also means that you won't just be paying more. So it just won't exist. If there's not enough of a market, then it won't exist. The flip side of that is that when you want and get those cheap goods, which let's be honest, we all do appreciate getting these cheap things for the price that we're getting them for. I mean, that's everybody, for the most part. You're more fickle about it than many, but I mean, it's the truth, If you want to get those things, then it does inherently mean that the country that you're getting them from is going to have some leverage on you. So then that becomes a really ultimate question of, does this globalized world last? Do I fight a war with China and then I have to deal with that? And it's like, how do you can't answer that as a consumer. You can have an opinion about it. But it's like you're dealing with structures and systems and countries that are way beyond our pay grade. And I would argue beyond the pay grade of our elected officials, no matter who they are or what party they belong